All right, guys. So we just saw a brand new Tomb Raider: Legacy of Atlantis trailer with the reveal date that was just released a little earlier today, and it's pretty exciting as a lifelong Tomb Raider fan. As a matter of fact, I believe I've been a Tomb Raider fan longer, I would say, than I've been a Resident Evil fan. It's incredible and almost surreal seeing Lara return in this light, in this fashion, and it actually really kind of speaks volumes to the direction the series is going after the, in my opinion, very underwhelming performance from the Survivor trilogy, which is 2013, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which, to be perfectly honest, I have not even played Rise or Shadow in its entirety because those games I feel are Tomb Raider in name only. You know, I could go down the list and repeat a bunch of the things that everyone's already said about the games, and as cliche as that may be, it's true. It is, namesake only. It is very linear. It took away the exploration aspect of Tomb Raider, and it just feels like you're moving from set piece to set piece without any actual freedom of exploration or of actual tomb raiding. Not to mention, Lara's character has been completely changed as well. And I've been missing for the longest time just the kind of arrogant, brash, reckless yet confident and sassy Lara Croft that we saw in the earlier games. So with this Legacy of Atlantis, of course, it's a remake of the first Tomb Raider, which is actually pretty interesting because we already did have an official remake of the first Tomb Raider, and that was with Anniversary. However, I actually think that one was also a very underwhelming game, although I wouldn't say it's a bad game, just kind of disappointing. It came out right after Tomb Raider Legend. It utilized its engine and it was basically recreating the first game, but it just really did not feel dynamic at all. It was a little repetitive, a little stale, and the environments didn't look as cool as they could have been. So with this remake, I think it has the potential to do an incredible job at bringing the visuals of the first game back to life. And just from this trailer that we've seen, we saw a lot more of the locations, a lot more visually of what these areas look like. We definitely got hints of Egypt, of Greece even a little bit, and we saw a lot more of the opening stages in Peru with the snow-filled mountains, and a little bit of the Lost Valley with the T-Rex, which, boy, that's I've got goosebumps just thinking about that, of what they can do. Now, a few things that I found really interesting about this trailer was that we see that there's kind of this merger, this hybrid between the Survivor Lara and then the old Lara. Of course, with the seemingly the characteristics as well as the appearance is very much classic Lara, but there are some little things like her using the grappling hook or the pickaxe. I think we saw a little bit in the beginning where she used it to, stop from falling down from this collapsing bridge, which it's really got me kind of thinking that I think there's been this identity crisis in Tomb Raider, and I don't think Crystal Dynamics has fully committed one way or another to keep going with the newer Lara that we've seen most recently with the Survivor trilogy, or if they really want to go back. And that kind of, that's got me a little worried that they don't want to risk going all the way back to classic Lara, which I feel they totally should do because I feel like that is the de facto Lara, that is the true Lara Croft. Not this wishy-washy emotional. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing that, this new character showed emotion or that she cared or that, there were times where she seemed like she was overwhelmed and defeated. But just how that was like the crux of her existence. And with the Survivor trilogy, they had originally built it as being something more of like an origin story. So we were supposed to see how she turned into the hardcore Tomb Raider that she is. But that never really gave us a payoff. Like, we never really saw that transformation complete. That was probably the only thing I would have found, worthwhile in that series, was to see her start from where she was on the island with the whole wreckage and all that to kind of like where she ended up in Tomb Raider 1. Which, funny enough, in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the original ending actually was a little bit of a cliffhanger slash prequel to Tomb Raider 1, as we saw a letter from Natla, which presumably would have set up the meeting between them two. But in just this weird, like, change at the last second, they patched in the ending literally like the first day the game came out, so that you got this new kind of generic ending, which they had like a little Easter egg to some of the elements of Tomb Raider 1. It just wasn't good at all. Which actually, I believe it's a really good thing that they had their wake up call of kind of the negative reception of the later Tomb Raider games. And on top of that, we also saw a re-release of the first 6 Tomb Raider games, in essence, all remastered. Not remade, just remastered with HD textures and upgrades, which overall, I thought they did a really tremendous job at bringing the games back to this generation. There were a few things in terms of like bugs and glitches, and well, let's not talk about challenge mode. That's a whole separate video for a whole nother day. But overall, like I said, I think they did a really good job at redoing these games with modern visuals. But I think the reception of that really kind of inspired them and showed them that there was still value in this original Lara Croft. And I fully believe that those 2 releases of Tomb Raider 1 to 3 and then Tomb Raider 4 to 6 were Crystal Dynamics, the developers, getting their feet wet to see what the reception is, to see what the pulse is on the fans who, if there was still any fans that wanted to see the original Lara Croft. And overwhelmingly, I think the answer is yes. And overwhelmingly, I think that most fans want to see Lara go back to the roots. And that's not to completely discredit what we saw with the Survivor trilogy. They had a few fun parts to them. They weren't all bad. It was a fine game. Like, it wasn't a horrible game or anything. But for Tomb Raider, it just lacked any of that original feel. And this is not nostalgia speaking. I mean, it's linear. It's more or less on rails. You have the illusion of exploration and freedom, but it's not really. You're still kind of being guided along. You never really felt lost, or never really felt like you were truly alone in like this dark tomb with great atmosphere and ambiance. And look, I am actually a really big fan of the Legend, Anniversary, and Underworld series. And I think they did a fairly good job at like kind of bringing the gameplay into a more modern context, but still keeping the feel of the original Tomb Raiders. And granted, we did see Lara's character at that point start to, show a little bit more emotion and development. And I don't think that was a bad thing. I think that was actually a really, really good balancing job. And I'm hoping that with Legacy of Atlantis, that we kind of take the same approach that the Legend series did, where it's like, yes, this is kind of a newer Lara, and she is a little bit more grounded, a little more empathetic and caring, but she's still sassy. She's still arrogant, and she's still a badass at the end of the day. Some of these environments that we saw in Tomb Raider 1, like the Peru levels, like the Lost Valley, we saw a little bit of Tomb of Qualapec, which, like I said, that the potential is the sky for Crystal Dynamics and what they can do. One thing that I loved about Tomb Raider 1, which people are going to laugh, is that I really like the story. Not necessarily the way that it was told or the way it came across, but I love the idea behind it. Whereas Lara is hired by this kind of unknown, mysterious, just wealthy entrepreneur who has this interest in these ancient artifacts, and it leads her onto this journey where she ends up uncovering the lost city of Atlantis. And I think that was one of the strongest elements of the original Tomb Raider, was the representation of Atlantis, because it was not this like underwater forgotten city paradise. It was pretty gruesome. It was this like fleshscape giant organism that was beating and living, and it was full of blood and tissue and flesh and gore and body and horror. Like, the last levels of Tomb Raider 1 is on level with like the visuals of Doom Chapter 3, Inferno. Like you are literally in hell. And I think that's not really talked about. It's kind of lost in time, whether that's because it was towards the end of the game and maybe players didn't really get that far in the game, or people just don't really remember the story of Tomb Raider 1. They might remember like the first levels or the big T-Rex reveal. But that was like my favorite part of Tomb Raider 1, and I really hope that we see this version of Atlantis really brought to life. That was something in Anniversary that I really didn't like, because they changed Atlantis into more of like this sci-fi, high-tech, like ancient alien civilization, which, you know, technically it was in the game, but like it was lacking any of the just horror aesthetic of it, which was really powerful. So I'm hoping that we see a similar vein of Atlantis, no pun intended, because there are a lot of pulsing veins in those levels. So overall, I am optimistic about the game. Now, are we actually going to see the original Lara Croft return? I think there'll be a lot of her characteristics that do come back, because as far as this looks like is that it's going to be a reboot. I've heard rumors that they're going to try to unify the timelines, basically meaning you're going to take the canon from the original series to the Legend series and the new Survivor series and merge them all so that they are all canon. I think that's going to be quite a task, and there's just too many contradictions in them, so I don't think that'll necessarily work, but we'll see what they do. Whether this is a reboot or whether this is kind of like a, you know, current modern day resurrection of the series. We'll see. Either way, it's looking exciting. They have that other game coming out, which, if I'm not mistaken, they said it was a sequel to Underworld. So, who knows? Who knows where they're going to go from here? But I think it's great to see that they're kind of moving away from what we saw with the Survivor Lara. Not a fan of that Lara at all. It literally did not feel like Lara Croft. They just changed the character way too much, and I miss the old Lara. And that's at least what it looks like. Oh, we saw a lot of new characters here too. We also saw the appearance of Larson, whose character looks like has been redesigned quite a bit, and I think is going to have a much bigger role and put much more depth is going to go into developing his character. And I almost feel like he's going to be almost like a sympathetic, quote unquote, villain. In the first game, he was more of just like this evil asshole that it was insinuated that him and Lara had history. But in this game, I think there's going to be a big play on that, with a dynamic between Lara and Larson that's almost like frenemy, or even more than frenemy, kind of just like they don't really hate each other. There's kind of like this mutual care for each other, but, you know, of course, if you know the story, that's going to play out the way it does, with Larson maybe betraying her. So that is interesting. One other thing I want to point out is that there was a little part in one of I think it was like the Egypt level, where like Lara is taking on another human enemy, which one of the big things about the original Tomb Raider 1 game was that there was a heavy lack of human enemies, which it focused on environment, atmosphere, and just like natural predators like bears and wolves and bats and lions, what have you. I wonder if they are going to try to add more human enemies to it. I think that would be a mistake if they do. Or maybe that was Pierre. I mean, in Anniversary, they turned him bald. So who knows? But let's sound off in the comments. Is this the direction you want to see Tomb Raider? What do you want to see after this? Do you think that the series should kind of continue off from where Underworld left off, or do you think we should see more reboots? It's exciting, and I'm happy that Lara's getting some love, and, you know, hopefully we'll be given a true Tomb Raider experience for the first time in a long time. But until then, be safe. Hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next time.